Our scripture reading today is from Genesis 24, 34 through 18, verses 42 through 49, and verses 58 through 67. So he said, I am Adam's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become wealthy. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and he has given him all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son.
I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, if now you will only make successful the way I'm going. I am standing here by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I shall say, Please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, Drink, and I will draw for your camels too. Let her be the woman that the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew it. And I said to her, Please let me drink. She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I will also water your camels. So I drank, and she also watered the camels. When I asked her, Whose daughter are you? She said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put the ring on her nose and bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so that I may turn either to the right hand or to the left.
And they called Rebekah and said to her, Will you go with this man? She said, I will. So they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah, and they said to her, May you, our sister, become thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes. Then Rebekah and her maids rose up, mounted the camels, and followed the man, and the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now Isaac had come from Beer-lahai-roi and was settled in the Negeb. Isaac went out in the evening to walk in the field, and looking up, he saw camels coming. And Rebekah looked up, and when she saw Isaac, she slipped quickly from the camel and said to the servant, Who is the man over there, walking in the field to meet us? The servant said, It is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death.
my earliest church experiences as a new Christian while I was a teenager were filled with a lot of definitions and categories. It seems like pastors and teachers spend a lot of time emphasizing that everything has its place in God's great creation. And last month in Faith and Films, we watched a movie called Remarkably Bright Creatures, and Sally Field's character, Tova, was always saying there is a right way and a wrong way to do things. And there is truth to that, but we know that there's more than one way to make a taco, right? There's more than one way to brush your teeth. There's more than one way to, I don't know, bathe a cat if you're brave enough to do that. Because people have different styles, different preferences, and different strategies to get stuff done, right? Even, you're pursuing the same goal, but you want to get it done. And one thing I discovered in those early years was how often pastors and teachers talked about the importance of biblical marriage. Now remember, I was one of those kids that actually read their Bible. And so I would ask questions like, well, exactly how many concubines am I allowed to have? Family systems in biblical times are complicated. And as we discovered a few weeks ago when we studied Abraham and Sarah, apparently it's okay to borrow your wife's servant if you think your wife is too old to have children. And to complicate matters even more, Sarah was Abraham's half-sister. And I almost forgot about it. But here it is in Genesis 20. Later, one of Abraham's grandsons, Jacob, intended to marry Rachel, but instead his uncle, Laban, who also becomes his father-in-law, tricks him into marrying Leah first. Now, eventually, Jacob did marry Rachel too, and the result were 2 wives, 2 sisters, 1 husband. And don't get me started on Israel's kings. Oh, my word. King David had numerous wives, but not to be taken down. Solomon, his son, also known as Solomon the Wise, had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which doesn't sound very wise, but at least I got my answer from Sunday school, right? I don't know about you, but whenever I brought up these stories in Sunday school, sometimes the teachers would explain things away. They'd say, well, Israel was trying to fulfill God's promise to Abraham that his descendants would outnumber the stars in the sky and that he would build a nation through those descendants. And so sometimes my Sunday school teachers use terms like ethical non-monogamy to explain practices that certainly wouldn't be legal or even advisable in today's culture. I just wanted to get all that out of the way today, this morning, before we jump into today's passage, because this is one of those passages that people point to when they talk about biblical marriage. But if we spend all our time trying to compare it to our modern understanding of marriage, we're going to miss out on what this whole story is about. Now, our story begins with Abraham wanting to find a wife for his son Isaac. And so he sends his trusted servant Eliezer out to Abraham's homeland because he does not want Isaac to marry a Canaanite woman. And it's interesting, they in this passage it never mentions Eliezer's name, but it mentioned it back a little. So Eliezer goes out to the city, and before he enters the city, he asks God for a sign. He says, Lord, if the woman you have chose not only offers me water, but also volunteers to water my camels, I'll know she's the one. Kind of like I knew Mary was the one when she wanted to borrow one of my comic books. But this is Eliezer. He's doing this on behalf of Isaac. So it's kind of interesting how that works. But then something important happens. He doesn't pray and take a nap. He watches. He pays attention. He engages. And before long, Rebekah arrives and does exactly what he had prayed for. She offers him water and then voluntarily draws enough water for all his camels. Realizing that God had answered his prayer, Eliezer praises God, tells Rebekah's family why he has come, and asks for her hand in marriage on Isaac's behalf. And then the story reaches its emotional center. Rebekah is asked one simple question: will you go? No one forces her. Not Eliezer, not her father, not her brothers. She has agency. She has choice. And her answer is simple: I will. With those two words, she leaves her parents, she leaves her routines, her neighbors, her security, and everything she has ever known to marry a man that she has never met. She doesn't have all the answers. She doesn't know exactly how the story is going to end. She simply trusts God is already ahead of her. What fascinates me about this story is that everyone is moving. Abraham sends. Eliezer goes. Rebekah serves. Rebekah leaves. Isaac receives. Nobody just sits around waiting for God to do everything. Everyone participates in what God is already doing. And we often reduce faith down to something that we believe. But Genesis reminds us that faith is something we do. So here's the question I want to put on the table this morning. How many of us are trying to follow Jesus while refusing to leave anything familiar? And you might be thinking, ooh, can't we go back to talking about biblical marriage or something? No, because that isn't what this story is about. Sure, it's interesting to talk about complicated family trees and ancient marriage customs, and it may even make us feel good about how much our society has advanced and become so superior to other cultures. But that's not what this is about. The story is about us. It's about how we respond to God. We say, oh, sure, I love God as long as I don't have to change. Or we say, I trust God as long as I know exactly what the outcome is going to be for everything. We'll say, I'll pray as long as God blesses the plans that I've already made. But God says, no, come with me. That requires faith. A couple of months ago, we talked about how many people think that faith means certainty. And yet, here's another story that says otherwise. Nobody knows exactly how this story is going to go down. Abraham doesn't. Eliezer doesn't. Rebekah doesn't. Even Isaac doesn't. Faith isn't certainty. Faith is trust. Think about what's happening in our congregation right now. A few months ago, we launched a capital campaign. We asked one another to imagine more. We invested in a future that we cannot fully see yet. And that's exactly what Rebekah is doing here. She isn't preserving what's familiar. She is stepping towards the future that God is preparing. And again, this story isn't really about marriage. It's about discipleship. It's about the kind of faith that doesn't simply believe God exists, but trusts God enough to move. Abraham moved. Eliezer moved. Rebekah moved. Isaac welcomed what God had prepared. Faith always has feet. When Jesus called his disciples, he never said, tell you what, guys, figure everything out first, and then come back when you're certain. No, he didn't do that. He simply said, follow me. And they dropped everything and did so. Following always requires movement. So here's what I want you to take home with you today. Every one of us is somewhere between what is familiar and the future that God is preparing. Maybe God is calling you to forgive someone. Maybe God is inviting you to repair a broken relationship. Maybe God is nudging you to say yes to a ministry that you've been resisting. Maybe God is calling you to step up to the plate in ways that you've never done before. Maybe it means trusting God through a difficult diagnosis. Maybe it means finally saying yes to a calling that has been quietly tugging away at you for years. The question Rebekah heard is the same question that every disciple eventually hears. And that is, will you go? Will you trust me? Will you leave that which is comfortable? Will you take the next faithful step? We don't know where that journey is going to lead. I mean, Rebekah didn't. Abraham didn't. Eliezer didn't. And during Jesus' time, the disciples sure didn't know either. But they discovered what we are invited to discover today. And that is, faith isn't having all the answers before you begin. Faith is trusting that God is already waiting for you wherever God is calling you to go. Now, will you go?